As my father took his final breaths, his skin pale against the hospital sheets, my stepmother leaned across him and looked me in the eye. Her voice was steady, almost satisfied. "You were his biggest disappointment." The words hit harder than any slap. I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just sat there frozen while her eyes burned through me with the same contempt she'd carried for years. She turned back to his lifeless body like I didn't matter. Like I was nothing more than the reason she had to be there in the first place. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that just hours before my father died, he had called me into that room alone. He told me something she never expected. And I kept quiet, waiting for the lawyer. When he finally walked in with the envelope in his hand, the air changed. What he read out loud turned the entire room against her. And the woman who had spent years tearing me down suddenly started screaming because the truth my father left behind didn't just speak for me. It shattered every lie she had ever told. Everyone watched in silence. When I got the call from the hospital, I was sitting at my kitchen table, eating cold leftover pasta and clicking through freelance job boards like I always did on quiet Monday nights. The nurse's voice was gentle but clinical. My father had taken a turn for the worse. They didn't think he'd make it through the night. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at the wall, my fork still in my hand, heart hammering in my chest. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles in your bones when grief tries to sneak in early. Like your body knows something terrible is coming before your mind can process it. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my car keys, and drove across town. The roads were wet from a passing storm. Every red light felt like a personal punishment for all the moments I hadn't spent with him lately. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 weeks. He'd said he was fine, just tired. Loretta said there was nothing to worry about. But Loretta had been lying since the day she married him. When I walked into the ICU, the air smelled like bleach and machines. It was quiet except for the hum of monitors and the occasional muffled cough from down the hall. I spotted him instantly. My father, Thomas Bell, once a proud architect who designed some of the most stunning homes in the city, now looked like a shadow of himself. His skin had lost its glow, his cheeks hollowed, his chest rising and falling in uneven intervals. He looked small, and that scared me. I stood beside his bed and reached for his hand. Felt cold, but he moved his thumb slightly when I touched it. I whispered his name, and for a second I swore he smiled. I hadn't always felt this distant from him. In fact, I used to be a daddy's girl. He raised me alone for almost 7 years after my mother died. We cooked pancakes on Sundays, took long walks with our beagle, and built pillow forts in the living room on rainy days. He taught me how to tie my shoes, how to fix a bike chain, and how to dream big even when life felt small. Everything changed when Loretta came into our lives. I was 14, awkward and guarded. She was polished, loud, and exhausting in the way some people are when they need to be the center of every room. She wasn't cruel right away, just distant, always correcting my posture, commenting on my clothes, or calling my art cute but pointless. I tried to bond with her. I really did. I asked if I could help her cook, if she wanted to come to my school's open house, if she needed help decorating the new guest room, but every time I tried, she made it clear I wasn't wanted. Not really. And the worst part was that slowly my father stopped noticing. He stopped asking me to hang out after school. He missed my art showcase 2 years in a row. He laughed nervously when Loretta teased me at dinner. He told me I was being too sensitive when I told him I felt pushed out. By the time I turned 20, I'd moved out and barely visited. Not because I didn't love him, but because being in that house made me feel like an outsider in my own story. Till I never stopped checking in. I called even when Loretta answered and made it clear I was interrupting. I sent birthday cards. I texted when I knew he was at his office alone. And when I heard he'd been hospitalized 2 months earlier, I made every effort to visit until Loretta told me he wasn't up for company, that he needed rest, that I should give him space. Now, seeing him in that hospital bed, my chest ached with everything unsaid. I pulled the chair closer and sat with him in silence, tracing circles on the back of his hand with my thumb like I used to do when I was little. His breathing stuttered once, then smoothed out. And that's when I heard her heels in the hallway. Click, 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 Loretta. She walked into the room like she owned the place, lips painted deep red, her perfume too strong for a hospital ward. She looked at me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out of her life. I didn't speak. Neither did she. She just looked at my father, then back at me and smiled. But it wasn't a smile of comfort. It was the kind that warned a storm was coming, and I knew deep in my gut that whatever peace I'd found in those few quiet minutes with my father was about to be shattered. Loretta didn't say anything at first. She placed her designer handbag on the side table like she was settling in for a casual lunch and not a man's final hours. She stood beside my father's bed and adjusted the blanket like she was playing the role of the loving wife. And then she turned to me, her eyes cold and smug. "I see you finally decided to show up." I didn't answer. I just looked at my dad, watching the steady beep of the monitor, silently willing it to keep going. She sighed loudly like my presence inconvenienced her. "He's been asking for you, you know, but not in the way you're thinking." I kept my mouth shut. Over the years, I'd learned that arguing with Loretta was like throwing a match into gasoline. She didn't want resolution. She wanted a fight. She wanted proof that she could break me. "He told me he regretted a lot of things," she continued, brushing imaginary lint off her blouse. "Mainly how much energy he wasted trying to fix someone who didn't want to be fixed." I blinked, my jaw clenched, but I still didn't speak. She took a step closer, standing now between me and the heart monitor. "He tried so hard with you, Ka, but you were always lost, moody, ungrateful. You had everything and still acted like a victim." I inhaled deeply and focused on my father's hand. His fingers didn't twitch this time. I wasn't sure if he was even aware anymore. That thought hit harder than her words. Then came the final blow. "You were his biggest disappointment." It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said it. So calm, so certain, like she'd rehearsed that line and waited for just the right moment to use it. I looked up at her then, really looked. There was no sadness in her face, no grief, just bitterness and something that looked dangerously close to satisfaction. I didn't speak. I wanted to. I wanted to scream, to curse, to say everything I'd buried over the years, but something in me refused to give her that. Instead, I just looked back down at my father's face, willing him to open his eyes and make it all stop. Loretta laughed under her breath. "Course you won't defend yourself. You never do. Always playing the silent martyr." She moved to sit in the corner chair and crossed her legs like this was just another afternoon of judging me from a distance. My cousin Jade arrived not long after. She stepped into the room quietly, glanced at Loretta and then at me. Her face tensed when she saw the look in my eyes, and she squeezed my shoulder as she passed. She knew the history. She'd seen it all unfold over the years. She didn't have to ask what had been said. We sat there together, the three of us, in heavy silence. The only sounds were the monitor and the occasional distant cough from Aniz's station. I kept holding my father's hand, gently brushing my thumb over his knuckles. And then, for a moment, he stirred. His eyelids fluttered. His head turned slightly in my direction. A faint whisper escaped his lips. "Ka." I leaned in. "I'm here, Dad. I'm right here." He smiled. It was faint, but it was real. And I saw something in that smile. Regret, love, maybe both. Loretta stood up quickly, trying to lean in too, but he didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on mine. He tried to say more, but no words came out. just a shallow exhale and then nothing. The monitor flatlined. The nurse came rushing in, pressed a few buttons, and then quietly shook her head. Time of death, 9:16 p.m. Loretta stepped back, hands clasped together as if she were the grieving widow, but her face was unreadable. No tears, no tremble, just a tight-lipped expression and a glance in my direction like she'd already claimed victory. I felt like I was underwater, the room muffled and blurry. But deep in my pocket, I felt the weight of the envelope my father had given me just a few days earlier. His voice echoed in my mind. Whatever happens, just wait for the lawyer. So I stood. I kissed his forehead. I said goodbye. And I left Loretta alone in that sterile room with all her lies and cold practice smiles because I knew her moment was coming and it was going to burn. The night after my father died, I barely slept. I lay on my couch in a hoodie that still smelled faintly like the hospital, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in slow, useless circles. I thought I'd cry. I thought I'd break down or scream or throw something. But I didn't. I just lay there replaying his final whisper. The look in his eyes and the way Loretta had already started making calls before his body was even cold. She didn't waste a second. By morning, she had already posted a heartfelt tribute on Facebook full of photos that didn't include me. Caption read, "The love of my life. Thank you for our beautiful journey. I'll miss you forever." Underneath, people were commenting things like, "So sorry for your loss, Loretta, and you two were soulmates." One even wrote, "I hope Kaya is supporting you through this." I turned off my phone and tossed it across the room. That same morning, I found the envelope my father had handed me. I had tucked it between two notebooks in my dresser drawer when I got home. At the time, I didn't know what was inside. I hadn't opened it. I just remembered his voice. "Whatever happens, wait for the lawyer. Let him speak for me." That was all I needed to hear to trust him. For the first time in years, he had looked at me without distraction or guilt. And I knew he meant it. So I waited. 3 days later, I stood outside the law office of Hayes and Milton LLP, clutching the unopened envelope in a knot of nerves that hadn't loosened since the funeral. Jade walked beside me. She offered to come for moral support, and I didn't turn her down. Her presence was like armor, silent, solid, and grounding. Loretta was already inside when we arrived. She wore a tailored black blazer, pearls, and that same smugness she always carried like perfume. She smiled politely at Mr. Hayes when he entered, acting like the grieving widow she had curated so carefully for the public. "Let's begin," he said, nodding for us to take our seats. We sat at a long mahogany table in a quiet conference room. The lights were warm, the air too still. Mr. Hayes opened a thick file and cleared his throat. "As per the last amended will of Thomas Elliot Bell, I will now read the final distribution of assets and personal wishes." Loretta leaned back, crossing her legs. I could see her calculating already, mentally, adding up property values, investment accounts, retirement funds. He had spent years treating his name like her ticket to a better life, and she was about to find out just how much or how little of that ticket was still valid. First, Mr. Hayes began. A personal letter was left with instructions to read it aloud before the official estate items are addressed. He unfolded the paper. The room went quiet. To Loretta, he read, "I know this moment is uncomfortable. I'm not proud of everything that happened between us, but I need you to hear this from me directly." Loretta shifted in her seat. "You and I built a life together, but there were pieces of me you never accepted, especially Ka. My daughter was never your burden, no matter how you treated her like one." I froze. My hands gripped the armrest. I failed her in many ways. I let silence replace courage. But in these final moments, I want her to know I saw it all. Every insult, every cold shoulder, every attempt to erase her from my world, I allowed it, and for that I'm sorry. This will is my attempt to make things right. Loretta sat bolt upright, her jaw clenched. Mr. Hayes continued, now reading the formal parts. I leave the entirety of my architectural business holdings, my personal residence, and my savings account to my daughter, Ka Bell. Loretta gasped audibly. What? To Loretta Bell. I leave only the cabin in Fairwater County as it was a property she personally decorated and requested years ago. Her face went white. That cabin was worth maybe $40,000 on a good day. She stood furious. This is a joke. He wouldn't do this. I took care of him for years. I ran that house. I was his wife. Mr. Hayes stayed calm. He made these decisions clearly and consciously. We updated the will together 3 weeks ago. It's notarized and witnessed. Loretta's hands trembled. Her voice cracked. She manipulated him. She turned him against me. I didn't say a word. I just reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Inside it was a simple handwritten note. I trust you to carry on with what matters. Let her scream. The truth belongs to you now. And that's when Loretta started yelling. Screaming, actually throwing accusations and insults as everyone in the room stared in stunned silence. But I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel angry. I felt free. Loretta's voice echoed off the walls of that pristine law office like a siren. Mr. Hayes calmly tried to speak over her, but she didn't care. She was unraveling in real time, wildeed, red-faced, hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the conference table like it might steady her world. This is theft, she screamed, pointing directly at me. She manipulated him. She poisoned him against me. I was there every day while she stayed away. She doesn't deserve any of it. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her. Really looked. The woman who had spent years mocking my interests, undermining my relationship with my father, and treating me like I was some tragic leftover from his past. She was finally out of places to hide. Mr. Hayes sat calmly, his fingers steepled in front of him. Mrs. Bell, everything you're alleging was anticipated. Thomas was very clear in our final meetings. He understood how this would affect you. But these were his decisions. They are legal, binding, and final. Loretta's face twisted into something I'd never seen before, something raw, panicked, almost childlike in its desperation. He wouldn't do this to me. He loved me. He did, I said quietly. But he also finally saw you. All of you. She spun toward me, eyes wide. You think you won? You think this makes you better than me? I stood slowly, not out of pride, but because my legs were done sitting in silence. My hands were steady. My voice didn't shake. I don't need to be better than you. I just needed him to remember who I was. And he did. For a moment it was quiet. And in that silence something settled. Not vengeance, not even satisfaction, just truth. She turned to Mr. Hayes again, her voice cracking now. I need time to contest this, to get a lawyer. There must be something I can do. Mr. Hayes nodded politely. You're welcome to pursue legal avenues, but I assure you we've prepared for every angle. Witnesses were present. He even recorded a video confirmation if you'd like me to play it. Loretta's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her hands dropped from the table, limp at her sides. For the first time, she looked small. Not in the way my father had looked in that hospital bed, but in the way someone looks when the mask finally breaks and they have to face themselves in the mirror. I glanced at Jade. She gave me a subtle nod, quiet support pulsing between us like a heartbeat. Mr. Hayes continued reading through the will, confirming details about the house deed, the business ownership transfer, and a small scholarship fund. My father had left in my name to support young women in architecture. That one stopped me cold. I didn't even know he remembered that I'd once wanted to be an architect like him. 3 wrapped up, he handed me a key ring. He wanted you to have these today, he said. There were 2 keys on the ring. One to the front door of the house I hadn't lived in since I was 20, and one to the private studio he used to work in behind it. I stared at the keys for a long second before gently curling my fingers around them. Loretta was gone by the time I stepped outside. Her car was no longer in the parking lot. No apology, no parting words, just silence. Finally working in my favor. I walked to my car with Jade beside me. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees, casting everything in gold. "You okay?" she asked. I took a breath. "I think I am." "You handled that like a pro," she said. I handled it like a daughter who waited too long to be heard. We drove to the house. My house now. I hadn't been there in years. Not since I stormed out after Loretta said I'd never be enough for my father. But this time the keys slid into the lock like they belonged. The door opened easily. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Everything was just how I remembered it. My childhood drawings still hung in the fridge. The living room still had the leather chair he always claimed after dinner. The studio light in the backyard was still flickering through the blinds. I stood in the doorway, letting it all rush over me. My father didn't leave me money to hurt her. He left me this. His world, his space, his final truth, because in the end he remembered me. And finally, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. It's been 3 months since my father passed. The house is quiet now, peaceful in a way it never was when Loretta lived here. I wake up to birds outside the kitchen window, not the sound of her heels tapping across the tile or her voice criticizing how I brewed coffee. Too weak. I drink it the way I like it now, light with oat milk and just the right amount of cinnamon. The first week after the will reading, I stayed busy cleaning, unpacking, repainting the studio. I found boxes of my childhood art stored away in the attic, carefully labeled in my father's handwriting. He had kept every drawing I ever gave him, even the messy ones from kindergarten, especially those. One night, while sorting through his old blueprints, I found a file marked KB Future. Inside were drafts of a small art gallery. He'd started designing it after I left for college. I didn't know. He never told me, but he believed in me. Even after everything, even when he didn't know how to show it out loud, I cried for the first time in weeks that night. Not the kind of cry that leaves you hollow, the kind that washes something away, the kind that makes room. Jade visits often. She brings takeout and always sits in the same chair by the window, like she's claiming her corner of this new life with me. Sometimes we talk about Loretta, mostly in passing. I heard she tried to challenge the will, but didn't get far. My dad's preparations were airtight. She eventually stopped trying. I think she finally realized the man she thought she controlled had made his final decision without her. I don't hate her. Not anymore. Hatred is heavy. I carried it for so long I forgot what it felt like to breathe without it pressing on my ribs. But somewhere between the silence of this house and the truth my father left behind, let it go. I still feel him here. Not in a ghostly way. More like muscle memory. Like when I'm in the studio and I instinctively reach for the pencil he used to keep in the second drawer. Or when I walk past the coat rack and expect his navy jacket to be hanging there. I talk to him sometimes quietly, not because I think he can hear me, but because some words deserve to be said, even if no one's there to answer. Thank you, I say most often. Not just for the house or the keys, for seeing me. I used to wonder if staying silent that day at the hospital made me weak. If I should have stood up to Loretta, if I should have fought back louder, harder. But now I know silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's strength. Sometimes silence says, I'm not going to waste my breath proving myself to someone who's already decided I'm not enough because I was enough. I am enough. And my father knew that in the end. That's what matters. People still reach out occasionally. Old family friends, distant cousins. They say things like, I had no idea things were like that. Or your dad always lit up when he talked about you. I smile, thank them, and leave it at that. They don't need the whole story. The ones who matter already know it. One morning, I walked out to the backyard and unlocked the studio door. The light filtered in through the skylight, warm and golden. I hung my father's favorite drafting ruler on the wall above the desk. Then I pinned up my first new sketch in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And I finally had space to create again. In the quiet of that studios, I realized something. You can spend your whole life trying to prove your worth to the wrong people. Or you can wait until the right person sees you fully and leaves behind a legacy that whispers, you were never the disappointment. You were the hope, the heartbeat, the one who stayed soft in a world that tried to harden you. This house doesn't feel like an inheritance. It feels like forgiveness, a second chance, a final chapter that turns into a beginning. And I plan to fill every room with light, laughter, and the kind of love that never makes someone feel like they don't belong. 'Cause I know what it's like to be forgotten. And I know the power of finally being remembered. If this story hit you in any way, if you've ever felt silenced, overlooked, or made to believe you weren't enough, I want you to know something. You are not alone, and you are not a disappointment. Your worth isn't measured by who tries to tear you down, but by how you rise, how you heal, and how you carry your truth, even when it's quiet. If this story moved you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. Leave a comment below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts or your own experience. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and honest, subscribe to the channel. There's so much more I want to share with you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the loudest kind of strength is the kind that waits. Until next time.